The true crime boom of the mid-2010s might be one of the creepiest pop culture phenomena. From television series to podcasts, the true crime genre has exploded in recent years. But it's the audience demographic that may surprise you.
Weirdly, women love true crime. Women are totally into it. It's huge.
Time magazine reported that it's actually women who make up nearly 75% of true crime podcast listeners and about 80% of CrimeCon attendees. But that demographic narrows even further.
What is it about true crime that attracts such a robust female audience?
There's something to be said about maybe white women are overwhelmingly the listeners of true crime.
In an age where more and more women are identifying as feminists and fighting for equal rights, why is an industry that so often focuses on the exploitation and abuse of women thriving right now? And why are more women watching it? Today we'll explore the ethics behind true crime. What's working?
It's important that we know the reality of what being a woman is in this country and in this world.
I don't know that true crime necessarily changes how we view women. I would hope that, if anything, it would change, or maybe we would perceive women as being stronger.
And what isn't?
So you have this alignment of what's going on. There's a ton of crime covered in the news, but crime rates are actually going down. And so again, this inverse correlation, people are like, there's crime everywhere. But statistically, crime goes down quite a lot. Given that queer and women of color and people of color are overwhelmingly the true statistically sound victims in actual crime, but white women are the ones who are overwhelmingly portrayed in the victim position in true crime, there's a disconnect to that.
From psychologists and academics.
Do you feel that you can be both a feminist and a true crime fan?
What a question.
To the true crime podcasters themselves.
It's really confirmed to me something that I think I've felt in my gut for a long time, particularly as someone who's practiced criminal law, just some of the inequities that just seem to be systemic.
This is #Moments and Movements. So what are we talking about when we say true crime? For this story, I spoke with Kaley Ames, an academic who holds a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies at York University. Kaley researched representations of mothers who kill their children in theater and law through the disciplinary lenses of feminist maternal theory, classical studies, and Canadian criminal law and legal history.
When I think about modern true crime, I kind of start with In Cold Blood by Truman Capote in 1966. And then you kind of have the Manson murders that are in the late 60s, early 70s that certainly were very highly publicized due to the nature of some of the victims and because it was a serial murder. And then you kind of get into the late 80s, early 90s. That's when America truly goes berserk with true crime. You have the O.J. Simpson trial. You have the disappearance of JonBenet Ramsey. You have Jeffrey Dahmer, Timothy McVeigh, the Columbine shooting. You've got the Montreal École Polytechnique massacre, which is horrifying. Then you have all of these big celebrity murders. You have Tupac and Biggie and Selena are murdered. So America's obsessed with true crime. And then you have the shows like Cops and what's that other one? America's Most Wanted. So that's kind of yay, true crime. And everybody's watching it.
And that obsession has not slowed down. According to Apple, the 2014 podcast Serial, led by investigative journalist Sarah Koenig, was the fastest to reach 5 million downloads and streams in iTunes history. Even more recently, Forbes reported that the podcast My Favorite Murder gets 35 million streams a month, raking in a total of $15 million in 2019. So people are clearly consuming. But why?
Part of it is about, having anxiety about, okay, well, what if this were to happen to me someday? We don't really fully know someone, and they could just snap at any moment.
To answer some of these questions, I sat down with Christine Ferris, a doctoral student in clinical psychology at Antioch University. Her studies in forensic psychology ignited her interest in true crime.
True crime, we're looking at like the extremes of human behavior. It's not something that happens every day. So there's so much in our lives that we don't have control over. And so many people struggle with anxiety. And with anxiety, there's this feeling of impending doom, right? Like something terrible is going to happen. And there's nothing we can do to control it. And I think with true crime, maybe it just, it kind of puts our anxiety onto something else, or it's a way of redirecting our anxiety.
So can you walk me through it? If a woman is watching a true crime program, we'll say, how does that help her prevent a crime happening to her?
Well, I think some of it is just like observing the behavior of the perpetrator, and some of it is observing the behavior of the victim. There's a lot of research about like potential like warning signs for dating violence, right? Like red flags in dating relationships. So I think maybe with true crime, there's certain like red flags or warning signs, that someone might be ready to attack you or hurt you.
We don't really have hard statistics on it, and certainly no hard research. But there is a lot of like digital ink, a lot of articles written about like, why do women watch so much true crime? And I'm not super compelled by a lot of like the musings that people have. Because again, I do think that more research needs to be done about it. But a lot of people say many women, want to explore the danger of violent crime from the safety of their home. And like, this opinion is like LOL to me. It's awfully simplistic is what I'll say, because statistically, and according to research, like the home is the least safe place for women. Without a doubt, women are way at more risk of being raped, abused, or murdered by somebody that they know. Likely, if not a friend or a family member, then an intimate partner. So it's likely somebody that is in their home or comes to their home or is around their home. So I'm not super convinced by this argument that like women are sitting cozy on the couch being like, I'm so safe from violent crime, I'm just gonna watch it now. Like, that's not maybe, but like that seems like way like too much of a simplistic argument to me, when like the person they're most in danger of while on their couch is like the person sitting next to them. If we're gonna put aside the demographic of women, like why women? Well, women are taught to be and socialized to be empathic. They want to understand, they're taught to want to understand and to go out of their way to understand like how a person is feeling. And like true crime, the modern true crime genre, like overwhelmingly concerns itself with the psychology of the male perpetrator, of the violent male perpetrator. And so like women who are watching this might be like, they might not be like, well, he's so damaged, I want to fix him. But they might be trying to, some people say, oh, well, they might be trying to understand why men are violent so that they can ward off attacks in the future. Well, it's like women are socialized to know how to ward off attacks. Like, don't insult men to their faces, don't shame them in public, don't emasculate them. Like, women already know these things because they're taught to. It's possible that this is another avenue by which women are trying to understand that. But again, to me, that's not a super convincing argument.
Kaley and Christine have differing opinions when it comes to the why. But where they seem to find common ground is in the reality of our criminal landscape and gender differences.
You have this like inverse correlation happening. You have crime rates dropping, but then you have media coverage of crime that happens both mostly in downtowns and large urban centers, but also in suburbia, go up. So you have this like alignment of what's going on. There's a ton of crime covered in the news, but like crime rates are actually going down. And so again, this inverse correlation, people are like, there's crime everywhere. But like statistically, crime goes down quite a lot.
Kaley's right. According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, violent crime rates in the United States plunged between 1993 and 2019, down 49% to be exact. But interestingly enough, the Pew Research Center reports that most Americans believe that national crime rates are on the rise.
So I think it can definitely perpetuate fear, and it's not even the most realistic fear because it's not very common to be a victim of crime. Or I think we tend to perceive it as being a more common event than it actually is.
And the inconsistencies don't end there.
Well, I think women are generally the victims of violent crimes at the hands of usually it's at the hands of their intimate partners. Even though men actually, they tend to be the victims of violent crimes at higher rates than females.
Christine makes a good point. In a study published by the United States Department of Justice, it was reported that between the years of 1980 and 2008, males experienced a higher rate of victimhood due to homicide than females did. Statistically speaking, females are more likely to be homicide victims at the hands of their intimate partners or acquaintances, while males are more likely to be murdered by a stranger. Additionally, males are far more likely than females to get involved in a drug or gang-related homicide.
Violence among men is expected. It's something that's kind of normalized in our society. A lot of the focus is on women's behavior. And it's like, okay, if you are getting attacked or you're getting raped or whatever, it's because you were wearing something that you weren't supposed to be wearing, or you were at a certain place that you weren't supposed to be at, So it's like women are told, okay, you have to modify your behavior to accommodate, to the men around you. I think that happens a lot, even just on a like nuclear, like family level. But it's, we don't like raise our boys, teaching them about consent and telling them about rape and like, hey, don't rape women. You'd think it would be that easy. But unfortunately, it just seems that women are the ones that get, the responsibility is put on them to have to alter their behavior as opposed to really taking a hard look at our society and the values that we instill in our men.
How do these shows affect the way that society views women?
I don't know if the relationship is that true crime affects how we view women. I think there's already a way, there's a certain way that women are viewed. And I would hope that, if anything, it would change, or maybe we would perceive women as being stronger, and as being survivors, because there are a lot of women, in these true crime stories that do survive their attacks. And some of them, because they come forward about what happened and they go to the authorities, they prevent future attacks.
Men are socialized in a culture of hypermasculinity. And what does that mean? It means that, their sexuality is aggressive, that they like have the right to be, sexually aggressive towards women. And not only that like violence is super manly and that experiencing danger is exciting. So like what are some of those key words from there? It's like danger, excitement, aggression, sexuality, like all of these things together create like a personality soup that is real mean. As to men, it means that they're socialized to, see everything filtered through the lens of anger. And while women can absolutely be violent criminals, like men are more conditioned to see violence as an answer to their problems. And so, not only answer their problems in terms of like this woman, I'm just going to get rid of her by doing a murder. Like, it's more that, you know, they see women as objects, and so they're more likely to violently rape them and not ask for consent and think that a violent rape is just how sex should be. And then, you know, they are prone to beating a woman that they're married to like 20 plus years and thinking that that's just like how men deal with their emotions. And they might know, you know, on some subconscious level, like, I don't want to live my life this way, but because hypermasculinity also conditions men to not talk about their feelings or seek help for their emotional, social, economic struggles, that they're just going to be stuck in this box for a very long time. And it's very sad. Like, you know, one of the core foundational works of feminism is to free men, and not to free men, but to help society understand hypermasculinity, the way it presents in culture, and to help dismantle it. And that is something that, you know, was attempted with the Me Too movement, trying to understand how a man like Harvey Weinstein could just freely assault women and create this super dictator power structure within Hollywood that was absolutely detected. Everyone knew about it. But because this culture of hypermasculinity and patriarchal power, like, nobody could functionally really do anything about it.
I mean, it sucks that women have to change their behaviors when it's like men are the ones that are disproportionately, you know, the perpetrators of these crimes. But at the same time, I think we're socialized, you know, oh, you should be fearful.
Would you say that violence is sexualized in the media?
Depending on how it's reported on. It's interesting with true crime because it's almost like it places the onus of responsibility like on women, because it's like, okay, no one's going to believe us if we, you know, say that we were sexually assaulted by someone. So it's like we have to figure out a way to protect ourselves. If a woman is sexually assaulted, she was asking for it, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of calling it what it is, which is rape and sexual assault. So I think that can have, you know, really damaging effects on survivors of sexual assault, and it perpetuates rape culture as well.
I'm starting to get a better idea of the psychology behind this trend and why women are at the center of it. Now I'm ready to meet some of those directly involved in true crime. I wanted to understand how some of these podcasters got into the industry and what true crime means to them.
I think true crime gives us an opportunity to talk about the whole human condition, because it really does delve into, you know, all of human psyche. It talks about the economic conditions that lead some people to commit crimes. It talks about some mental health issues that I think are very important, and I think gives us a chance to highlight the fact that the world has probably lost some very talented people who may have had a positive impact on the world, just, you know, due to the fact that they've been a victim. So it gives us an opportunity to explore not just the crime itself, but the motivation, the consequences, and the justice issues behind a lot of things as well.
Mike and Macy are a father-daughter duo who co-host the podcast Cocktails of Crime and Fashion.
Since I've begun consuming true crime media, I feel more educated and I feel more aware of what does happen in our world. I grew up in a very safe neighborhood. You know, I feel like a lot of people maybe wouldn't lock their doors. We do, but very safe neighborhood. So I wasn't really exposed to that sort of thing, you know, knowing that some men will kill women for the sole fact that she's a woman or she rejected him. And I feel that now that I know that happens, I'm more prepared and educated. So I I would be shocked if that wasn't why other women liked to consume this media as well.
I always want to try to remember that even in these cases where there are victims, that we want to talk about the life that was lost and the promise that was lost.
So what is your criteria for choosing the true crime stories that you end up featuring on your episodes?
We just want it to be interesting, but not too overdone.
Yeah.
We don't want it to be something that like, we haven't done like John Benet Ramsey. We haven't done Ted Bundy. Not to say we might not do those one day for fun, but like, we're not as interested in those ones. In the beginning, we tried to do a bunch of local cases. So we've done a couple local cases as well. We worked with the Harvard police on a couple episodes to focus on stuff that they really wanted out there, cold cases that they're trying to solve.
We definitely, we like to mix it up with the unsolved and the solved. So we try to give it a good balance. So if we do like an unsolved case one week, we'll usually follow it up with one that's solved, or maybe a cult or a missing person.
Lydia loves cults.
I love cults. It's like I said, I'm into the psychology. So to me, it's so fascinating. Like it scares my mother. But she's like, that's terrifying that you love that. But it's like, I think that's so interesting. So that's something that we like to throw in the mix there as well.
Kat and Lydia are co-hosts of the podcast Truly Criminal.
Is there a specific type of story or format that you find works better for your podcast?
I think that we like anything that there's some debate about, because we do talk, like we'll chat like about the case, about other things. Like it's not just here's what happened, we'll speculate. So it's kind of fun. Like we did Rebecca Zahau, her mysterious death, and we thought that was a really fun one because there's no answers in that case, really.
Right.
So we got to kind of speculate on what we thought, and kind of like give our opinion and show everybody all the opinions out there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fun one. And I think any kind where there's a lot of history, where we have a lot of background on maybe the killer or the victims, like their childhood, because Lyd does such a great deep dive into that I think it's awesome to like really get like the grip of who they are as a person.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting on like a lot of the times I find in other true crime podcasts, they focus a lot on the case and what happened, which is, great and very important. But I also like to focus on why did that person become that way? Was it nature versus nurture? Or was it, I like to go really, really deep into the beginning to see if there's some sort of, not explanation, but some sort of rationale of it. How could a person do something like that? And on the other hand, how does someone deal with something like that happening in their life? So it's just really interesting. We really like to delve into the psychology for sure.
Mike, Macy, Kat, and Lydia share some interesting ideas. True crime has an opportunity to be an educational tool, one that could even shape our future for the better. But that line between honest storytelling and pure entertainment can certainly become blurry. As it would turn out, my concerns are not alone. The true crime industry has been under fire, particularly when it comes to ethics. I needed to better understand how true crime podcasters tackle this dilemma.
What responsibility, if any, do you two feel to the victims and the families of these true crime stories when you're sharing them on your podcast?
Oh, we feel a huge responsibility to kind of showcase who these people were as people, but also not step over the line. Like nobody needs to know too much. Like you don't need to know intimate details that are like not appropriate for people to know. We've actually had a family member reach out to us of a case that we did, who wants us to do a follow-up episode to just add even more information, give their take as well. And they were very positive about our episode. So that made us feel really good that, a family member listened and wasn't offended at all, just said, hey, can I contribute more information?
It affects more than just who the victim is.
And we don't want the victim to just be a victim. They're not a victim.
Right.
You know,
they're
they're
not just a victim.
Yes, something happened to them, and that is a big part of their death, but it's not their life, and it's not who they were in life. So we try to get that across. You could hear someone's story and get out of your own bad situation. You can recognize the signs maybe of an abusive relationship or a manipulative relationship in your life and get out because you're learning about it.
What criteria do you look for when you're deciding which true crime story to feature in your episodes?
Primarily, I want something that people have heard of before, if possible, and not all of them are like that, but I think that helps get some engagement going if they've heard of the Lindbergh kidnapping or the Charles Manson case. I think that's a good hook. We also want to try to avoid very recent cases where, the wounds are still open. And, we've had some of our listeners suggest cases to us that, just happened last year. And I'm pretty queasy about that. I'd hate to have a family member who is still, in the midst of grieving, feel like, we're trying to commercialize their loved one.
Is there specific language that you use or avoid in recounting these stories?
We try to be professional and we try to be sympathetic. And if we're not, I hope we get called on it.
And it's important to me that we keep up with how people how they want their characterizations to be discussed or said, so that's important to keep up with as well.
This idea of verbiage and narrative structure seem to be essential tools that both Kat and Lydia and Mike and Macy use to navigate their sensitive stories. But I'm curious if the true crime genre as a whole is as diligent as these podcasters are. To answer some of these questions, I went back to Kaley.
There is the way that we talk about both victims and perpetrators of violent crime. So typically in these stories, men are tortured but smart, and they're, maybe they turn out to be mentally ill, but they're definitely brutal and they're easily provoked. But certainly they're this tortured but smart thing is something that people are you have to be super smart to get away with serial murder or just even murdering one person. And it's I don't know. Have you seen police forces these days? If you're white and a man, they won't pay attention to anything you do. So I don't know if you need to be smart to get away with murder. I think you just need to be a white man. And then when it comes to women, it's they're innocent and vulnerable, but they're sexy, they're hot pieces of ass. And that's a problem too, because the over-sexualization of women is it's a media trope that exists in every genre, but we deserve innocence. If you're white, if you're a white woman, you deserve to be innocent, you deserve to be vulnerable. That's not the same for women of color or trans women, that's a whole other topic. But certainly if you're white and a woman, you're innocent and vulnerable, and then you get to be sexy, not too sexy, but sexy enough to maybe vaguely deserve to be murdered. So this Puritan American notion of womanhood definitely comes in, and that's the language that's used to describe victims, and people are more complicated than that. And certainly the male perpetrators of violent crime, they get as much as we try and call them monsters and evil and X, Y, and Z. To me, those are extremely lazy terms, because when you take those words away, what other words can you use to describe them? Well, they're calculating. They're planners. Or they had extremely good luck if they did a crime and were able to cover it up.
Right.
I don't No, so that language kind of gives the perpetrator like this elevated status to like, not only are they not human, they're like superhuman. They're like, how could they get away with this?
So looking at the current true crime media landscape, what role do you think feminism can play in shaping true crime narratives?
Yeah, so I love this question. So again, like what we were talking about before, diversifying the stories, diversifying the storytellers. I mean, here in Canada, I know you're in the States, here in Canada, a huge thing, that's been plaguing our country for an upsetting amount of time is the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And, that is something that governments have paid attention to and not paid attention to for the last 100 years. But only now, are these stories sort of kind of being told to mainstream audiences, but even still, like, not really. And this is like something that, foundationally, like our country has been built on the like marginalization and murder of like Indigenous women and girls. And so like, that's something that like storytellers in Canada have just like actively decided not to tell for a really long time. And that's like, again, something that needs to be fixed.
What Kaley is referring to is a phenomenon called missing white woman syndrome, a phrase originally coined by former PBS anchor Gwen Ifill. NPR describes this phenomenon as the mainstream media's seeming fascination with covering missing or endangered white women, like Laci Peterson or Natalie Holloway, and its seeming disinterest in cases involving missing women of color. Most recently, this was seen in the Gabby Petito case. National news outlets covered her disappearance and subsequent death nonstop, while citizen sleuths took to social media to express their own thoughts and findings. With such intense media attention on the Petito case, many were quick to note a glaring disparity in coverage for Petito and the lack of coverage for the thousands of missing Indigenous women and women of color across the United States. According to a CDC study from 2017, both Indigenous and Black women experienced the highest rates of homicide out of women of any other ethnicity or race in the United States. The U.S. Department of Justice has reported that many Native communities have murder rates against Indigenous women that are over 10 times the national average. Black Americans account for about 13% of the current U.S. population, yet Black women make up 1/3 of missing persons reported in 2020. These statistics are jarring, but the vast majority of these cases are rarely shared in true crime or mainstream media.
Like, there's something to be said about like maybe white women are overwhelmingly the listeners of true crime. Like, what do I mean by that? I mean that, like, if you have a history of being victimized, like, it's possible, but I don't know. Like, do you need to watch the ways in which, like, the marginalized group that you come from are, like, constantly marginalized and abused? Like, probably not. But white women who are like the most safe in society from being victims of assault or murder, just statistically speaking, it is likely that like white women want to vicariously explore the ways in which victimhood looks and victimization happens, because white women are overwhelmingly the victims in true crime. And so there's something there that I think a lot of people don't really talk about when it comes to why women are such a robust part of the true crime audience. It's like, well, when you're talking about women, like, which women? Like, is it white women? Is it queer women? Is it straight women? Is it, and to me, given that queer and women of color and people of color are overwhelmingly like the true statistically sound victims in actual crime, but white women are the ones who are overwhelmingly portrayed in the victim position in true crime. There's like a disconnect to that, to me there. Like if we're talking about representation in media, and like it's known that people don't enjoy consuming pieces of material that like they're not represented in, and then white women are overwhelmingly represented in true crime, there's like a very straight line there to me.
Kaley seems to have hit the nail on the head. When I started this story, I had no idea the extent of what I was walking into. As a true crime fan myself, I just wanted to better understand this seemingly clear conflict of interest, women watching the victimization of other women. But I'm starting to realize that it's even more complicated than that. And that perhaps my own biased understanding of the world and of race impacted my initial assumptions of what I might discover in my interviews. There is a whole other angle here. Only certain women's true crime stories are being told. As a whole, true crime audiences are more likely to be exposed to white women victimhood. So what kind of perspective is the true crime industry perpetuating by not sharing certain stories?
You know, typically we tell the stories of people that we, you know, want to remember, or or that society values. And so when you don't tell the story of people, it's like active dehumanization. It's if like the victims in these stories are women that are white women, it shows to the audience like who society cares about.
What sort of responsibility, if any, do true crime content creators have to the families of these victims?
I think there's a lot of ethics conversations that need to be had in terms of like how a story can be told ethically. Like, look, like if it's a story that's a part of the public, and again, like the public is a contested entity. Is it like the public in terms of like the general public, or is it like a matter of public record? Well, if it's a matter of public record, just because it can be looked up by anyone doesn't mean that everyone has the skills to look up a case. Not everyone is trained to know what to look for. Like content creators like have a responsibility just to tell these stories like ethically, like, you know, to complicate, you know, victims more, to complicate, you know, the, you know, police authorities more. Like there's just so much work that needs to be done overall. But certainly, yeah, like content creators have not, in my opinion, you know, like ethically, you know, acted ethically towards family members. And I think that's something that they should think about a little bit more if they don't already. I kind of question whether or not all of these stories need to be told when you have an audience that is so huge. I personally believe that the content creators, you know, do have a responsibility to the families. I mean, when Sarah Koenig did her podcast, Serial, it was an offshoot of This American Life, which is, I think, the #1 podcast in the world. At least it was at the time. And so, I mean, they had a very good like hunch that it was going to be extremely popular. Sarah Koenig did say that she approached the family of Heyman Lee, who was the victim in that story, and they didn't want to talk to her about it. But, you know, like in my heart of hearts, like, you know, there's a line there. Like, is it wrong? Is it, you know, the story is a matter of public record. So there was a lot that she could dig up. But again, you're coming back into a town that's already been completely traumatized, has put this story to bed, for a good 15, if not 20 years by that point, and then digging it all back up again when like the thesis of her story was that like memory is fundamentally flawed and the preservation of like what you did during a day that was traumatic nearly 2 decades ago, like it's fundamentally a flaw in our human cognition. Like that's what her thesis was, that like nobody remembers what happened that day. And like, so what, like, come on, like, could you have not found a better story?
I get where Kaley is coming from. True crime is a deeply delicate and sensitive subject matter. But maybe it's that level of vulnerability that makes the industry so attractive to some.
I really grew up with a strong, like, female-oriented family, as did Lydia.
Mm-hmm.
In my family, my grandmother was kind of in charge of everything, and she was a big reader and really into true crime. So I had all the Nancy, and mysteries. So I had all the Nancy Drew books. I had, like, any kind of mystery, novel, I was given it.
I also grew up in a very female-oriented family. I literally had almost no men. I was really close with my mom and my grandma and my aunt, and we were all, very strong women, always like, be independent. You can do anything you want as long as you put your mind to it. I was very much raised with that. And then, my mom used to watch SVU all the time. She used to watch, we used to watch Criminal Minds together. So like, that was kind of my basic start. And then once I moved in with her, the rest is history.
Dad and I have always bonded over true crime.
Awesome. So does it bring you guys closer together too?
Yeah, it has brought us together. It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
I was fascinated to hear these accounts from Kat and Lydia and Mike and Macy. These families used true crime as a way to connect and bond with each other, and even reclaim female victimhood.
I don't feel paranoid. I just feel like I understand what could happen to me and what could happen to my sister, my friends, my mom even. And it's important that we know the reality of what being a woman is in this country and in this world.
So why do you think it is that so many females and so many women are drawn to true crime?
I think part of it is about control.
Mm-hmm.
When you know what you have to worry about, you can plan for it, you can look for it. Like we were saying, kind of keeping your eye open, not looking down at your cell phone. You learn things in true crime. Like I would never have known you never go to the second location. Like if somebody's got a gun on you and they say, get in the car, your odds are much better if you run rather than get in the car. I never knew that. I would have just listened to what they said and got in the
do
car.
what they tell you.
And I'd be on the news because I'd be murdered. I just think that like, if you know what's out there, you're able to prepare for it a little bit. Not enough maybe to help you, but maybe yes, maybe it is enough.
It's really confirmed to me something that I think I've felt in my gut for a long time, particularly as someone who's practiced criminal law, just some of the inequities that just seem to be systemic. If the victim sometimes is a woman, especially any person of color, a lot of times the law enforcement and the prosecution doesn't seem to be as concerned as they could be. If the perpetrator is a person of color, a lot of times the punishment is a lot more harsh than it would have been otherwise. So just digging into the research, as I said, it's confirmed what I've known in my gut for a long time, that systemic racism, systemic sexism, that's real. It's not just something somebody says to get elected or to raise money. It's part of who we are as a society, and I think recognizing it is the first step to maybe slowly changing it into the type of country and the type of world that we all deserve.
True crime has the ability to really suck people in. There's a lot of information to process, and I think women really like that. Like at least women I know, I'm not trying to like stereotype, but a lot of women that I know like to kind of get lost in something, have something to relax, to think about and take your mind off of everything else.
The best horror movies are the ones that are the most realistic. So when you're listening, if you want to give yourself a little like reality check, true crime it's the best thing you can do there. We respect the victims in the crimes. We respect, their lives, them as people. We try to never victim blame, victim shame, anything like that. Like, we'll joke around about our own selves. We might talk a little bit of crap about like the person who perpetrated the crime, but we're never going to say anything negative about one of our victims or try to make them seem less. Like, some of our victims are sex workers. Like, and I think sometimes people don't treat them as people still.
It's not all about us anymore.
Exactly.
It's about the victim and what happened to them. And we try to make it very centered around the victim and not so focused on the person who perpetrated the crime, because they have the attention.
We're not glorifying
we don't
them.
want to glorify them. We don't want to give them anything that,
They don't need it.
They don't need it.
It's easy to get turned off by true crime. On the surface, these stories are scary. True crime spotlights the horrors of trauma, assault, and murder. And when you look a little closer, it unearths even more. Systemic racism, sexism, and socioeconomic disparities. True crime reveals the most vulnerable and the most at risk in our society. So how can we better protect those at risk? Kaley believes the answers lie in advocating for more diverse stories and storytellers.
Overwhelmingly, like, all stories for all time up until like very recently, and yet still they do, like, they benefit men, like straight white men, rich white men. So sometimes poor, it gets complicated. But yeah, so now, like, thankfully those things are getting complicated, but overwhelmingly with true crime, like I said before, like, the victims and perpetrators are both white, varying range of education levels, varying range of class. Sometimes they're suburban, sometimes they're urban, but one through line is that they're like white as hell. So that's why the language around the gendered language that we use to describe these like male on female, criminal situations. It definitely needs to be more nuanced. And then, I've touched a lot on already during this interview that, like, we need to dismantle this narrative around the hero police officer and like the try as hard as you can detective. Like, I don't know, there's like this trope that like the cops are like trying their best and that the cops were bested by the smarty pants criminal, and that like the cops, like, you should feel bad for them, like, oh, they were just like, they were trying to do best by the families, but like they just couldn't, they like the hair, they couldn't get the DNA off the hair. And it's just like, come on, like, police forces, as we know, are like the most well-funded institutions in America, in North America, and like all over the world. They're given an incredible amount of money. And like, this trope of like police and policing as an institution being like, it's propaganda, is what true crime mostly is. We need to, stop with the, propaganda. And I think feminism, has a role to play in, complicating the way that the police are depicted in true crime.
Kaley brings up some excellent points. Propaganda is the idea that media promotes celebratory portrayals of police officers with the intent of swaying public opinion for the benefit of police departments and law enforcement. Needless to say, this does happen a lot in true crime. I was curious what Christine's feelings were here. How might gender play a role within law enforcement?
There's more law enforcement officers that are men than women. And I think that's kind of unfortunate because I think sometimes that can do more harm to the victim if, depending on how the law enforcement, person responds, if they don't believe the victim's story, and that happens a lot, where, law enforcement officials won't believe the victim's story, or they're questioning aspects of the story or whatever. And I think, it would be good to have more, women as first responders in these types of scenarios when there's been some kind of attack or rape or whatever, because I think women are more, they're more attuned to these issues. They're aware of the fact that women aren't generally believed in these scenarios, that men their side of the story tends to be believed first.
Would you both consider yourselves to be feminists?
Definitely a feminist, even though I have a true crime podcast, so.
I consider myself one, Rachel. I certainly believe in and try to work for gender equality in our political realm, in our social realm, in our economic realm. And I think that's part of the world that I'd like to see.
I think that true crime is almost like an act of feminism in and of itself, because it's we're telling stories that, that maybe don't get told. And, we're talking about things that, maybe society doesn't want us to be talking about, or I see it as kind of a way of empowerment.
Do you feel that you can be both a feminist and a true crime fan?
What a question. You can be a feminist and a true crime fan. It takes a bit of work, which all feminism demands.
Sure.
A bit of work. Feminism is extremely concerned with storytelling, how stories are told and whose stories are told. And it's important to keep in mind that while, true crime, the genre is about nonfiction, it's about true things that happen, the genre suggests that it's a narrative, it's constructed, it's a story that's being told by someone who has a point of view and is being filtered through that. And so audiences, if they want to be feminist, need to ask themselves 3 questions when they're watching any story. I do this all the time, which is why it's impossible for me to enjoy anything sometimes. But, who's writing this story? Who benefits from this story? And who's missing from the story?
Even being a true crime fan can make you more of a feminist.
Yeah.
Because you're out there seeing there's all these crimes that are perpetrated against women. Women need to be equal. Women need to stand tall and be able to count on fairness. Some of the laws we see in cases where an offender might start out as a rapist and escalate to murder, and the sentences they get for raping or kidnapping or attacking women, attempted murder, can be so low sometimes, frustratingly low. And I don't know how anybody could hear that and not want to fight for better laws.
But yes, I feel empowered because I feel more aware of what goes on.
Someone has said knowledge is power. I don't have my Rogers down here to remember who said that, but maybe the more knowledge someone has, the more power they can take.
When you're consuming any story, really, it's important to ask those questions because it acknowledges bias.
In the aftermath of sexual assault or murder or crime or whatever, what the victims do with that, what their families do that, how they survive something like that, I think can be really empowering. So I don't see. I think a lot of people who are into true crime are feminists because we're very aware of the fact that men do commit violence against women.
Particularly being a man, sometimes I wonder, do I have the right to talk about a woman and what a man has done to her? Hopefully, if I can provide that balance by talking about the kind of person she was, what the world is missing by her not being here, maybe that balances it out.
Yeah, and we've definitely done a couple of episodes where, justice wasn't done. And a big part of that is because it was a crime against a woman. And, we want to bring attention to that and educate people and, make sure that the stories are told.
So you just have to be a careful consumer and just be aware that, you're listening to someone else's trauma. You're listening to tragedy.
For true crime stories to be ethical, they need to be more than just a scary story to tell around the campfire. Not only is that ode to the victims and their families, but as a pop culture phenomenon, true crime can shape our society for the better. And that's a responsibility that the storyteller has to own. Making sure that the true crime stories being told are reflective of what is actually happening in our society. Making sure that everybody's story is told. Understanding that human stories can't always have a nice bookend. Real stories are messy. Victims aren't always perfect, and law enforcement aren't always heroes. The true crime industry has a duty to share these stories with thoughtfulness and dignity. If there is an ethical way to share true crime stories, maybe the key to doing so lies within the feminist movement.